From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Spazzy's got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Art and music, golden blue, and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. I'm your host, Steve Schnee. On this very special episode, I'd like to first introduce my co-host. He's dashing. He's debonair. He's like James Bond without all that annoying spy and secret agent stuff. He's out of sight if it's taco night, but he's super fun on a donut run. He's everybody's best friend, and his name is Ronnie Barnett. Welcome to the Blanket Fort, Ronnie. How you doing?
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I'm doing good, and now I want some donuts. So,
Now, our very special guest tonight is making his second appearance here at the Blanket Fort. Born from the ashes of punk legends X-Ray Specs, Classix Nouveaux helped shape the sound and spirit of the New Romantic movement in England, alongside groups like Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet. Classix Nouveau's 3 original albums were reissued in a special box set on Cherry Red Records in 2021. That very same year, the band's 4 original members, Mick Sweeney, Gary Stedman, B.P. Herding, and SAL Solo, reunited and released a reimagined version of their classic song, Inside Outside. Now, 2 years later, they are returning with a fabulous brand new album by the name of Battlecry. Here to talk about that new release is the group's iconic singer, songwriter, and frontman, Mr. SAL Solo. Welcome back to the Blanket Fort, SAL Solo.
My goodness, is the interview over after all that, Steve?
The last time we spoke, we chatted about the Cherry Red box set that featured the first 3 albums. We talked about Inside Outside. Now here we are. We're chatting about the band's 4th album, Battlecry. It's the first album by the band in 40 years. How does it feel to have Classix Nouveaux back in action after so long?
How about resurrected from the dead?
Yes.
It's really only started to feel like anything in the past 2 or 3 weeks, actually, because everything else we've been doing has been in secret or behind the scenes. And all of a sudden, in the past 2 weeks, I'm thrown back into where I used to be.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of getting used to, really. Not really the talking part, because I've always liked people and talking to people, but there's just something strange about being sort of put up on a pedestal when I've been trying to be an ordinary citizen for about 30 years now.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back a few decades, when Classix Nouveaux originally split, you continued to create music both as a solo artist, and you also put out a couple of albums with a French, I guess you can call them an electronic space rock band called The Rockets. However, your excellent work over the last few decades has been a bit under the radar. After so long apart, what inspired you to get back together with the other members of Classix Nouveaux?
Well, it was the demand, really. I guess the phenomenon that we just didn't have when we were all young was this idea of 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds being in rock bands. Who would have thought,
Yeah.
I've often repeated that the first time we came to America and we were playing in New York, the Ritz Club off of Fifth Avenue, and our agent said, I've got tickets tonight to see the Stones. I want to see if they can still rock at 40.
Yes.
And it had not been known, had it? You see?
Yeah, exactly.
everybody had their few moments in the spotlight, and then they were gone, and they did whatever they did as old people. And for some reason, our generation, and even those a little bit older than us, won't let go. But more importantly, the fans won't let go. And I think that's what we just never imagined. If anything, it kind of seems with age that people get to appreciate things a lot more. And some people say it's because the music that's come out since then has been crap, really. And certainly there's a good case to be made about that. Just talking to people, it seems to me that rock music in the 50s, before our time, must have been very exciting when it was brand new here in America. Next thing, all the English guys take it over, and you got the British invasion that carried on until I suppose the mid-70s, really, because obviously after the Beat Generation, then you had Zeppelin and Purple and all of those, and Yes and Genesis, and then Johnny Rotten and Sex Pistols come over and ruin it for everybody. And so nobody, for another like half a decade at least, nobody in America wanted to know about British music. And if it were not for that, I mean, Ronnie would have been a superstar, I'm sure, with the Muffs, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
They kind of destroyed the reputation of rock music for a while. And so it kind of seems now, I've been an American for a long time, and I see all the historical stuff. It seems like America was populated pretty much with hair bands at that time and power ballads. And so we didn't pay any attention over there to that stuff. And it seems like you didn't pay too much attention over here to our stuff either. And so at the start of the 80s, we were just almost like, I guess, where the Beatles and people were at the start of the 60s, where we had to kind of restore our reputation, build it back up, you know?
Inside Outside is a classic recording, but this new version, it brings the past and the future together in what I consider a very spectacular way. Was that the original idea, though, to just revisit an old song and to see if the band's chemistry worked together? Or were you considering working on some new material before you'd release that one?
Well, I think the first thing is the going back to the fan groups, because I think when they started up, we didn't really have any particular awareness of them or much interest, really. You know, we'd left Classix Nouveaux behind long ago. And as they started to build up more and more, somehow it came to our attention. And when it did, it was kind of humbling, really, because first of all, when you know you've had such an impact on people's lives that they're still remembering it, 40 years later, that's kind of humbling. And they're posting old posters and tickets, and they have the dates of all the record releases and stuff. Who knows where they get this stuff? We've come to the conclusion at this point, if anything is anywhere online, somebody's going to find it in our fan groups. They do. Yeah. Even stuff that we're not supposed to be putting out, they somehow get in there and find it. But they're so dedicated. So the original idea was really just to record a song, kind of like a musical birthday card, really, just as a kind of thank you to the fans. And so we tried a few of the songs, probably 3 or 4 of the old songs, just to see what would they sound like in the 21st century.
Right.
And the one that everybody liked best was Inside Outside. And so when we put it out, we didn't have any great ambitions for it or anything. It was just, okay, fans, thank you, we're aware of you, and now we'll get on with our lives. And so it was a bit of a shock when right away they was shouting, new material, we want new songs.
Yeah.
And none of us had ever thought of writing any new songs for Classix Nouveaux since the 80s.
Yeah.
And so there was a panic that set in, like we're asking one another, anybody got any songs left over, that we could use or something? And then how could you possibly sound like the 80s again in the 2000s?
Mhm.
We can't go back. I can't write new songs like that because I'm not in that mindset anymore. Lives have
Yeah.
gone on. So after a few weeks of sweating, one day I kind of had this little light went on and said, well, what would it be if there was a Classix Nouveaux today? What would you sound like? Never mind about what it used to sound like then.
Right.
What would you want it to sound like today? And that was very liberating because we sort of agreed, well, let's just do what we like and what we feel like. We've moved on, the fans have moved on. And so let's just explore. And it took a while to explore because even the inside outside that we put out 2 years ago, whenever it was, is not the same inside outside that's on the album now.
Right.
Because at that moment, we just hadn't figured out what we wanted to sound like. But once the album started developing, then after a while, we had established a new identity. I mean, even our single of a year ago, Fix Your Eyes Up, although it's not that different on the new album, but even at that point, we weren't 100% sure how the whole thing was going to end up sounding.
Mhm.
And so as it was developing, we'd have Zoom calls just like this with the band members and talk about stuff. And I remember one of them saying at one point, I didn't ever expect it to sound this good. That's pretty much what everybody's saying now, because today the record company sent our first written review it came from Italy, because I guess they still have printed magazines there. The rest of us are online, you know?
Yeah.
So it looked like it's a copy from printed magazine, and it said something about, it's classy synth pop with a bit of prog, much better than expected.
Have you guys all been in the same room together, Sal?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Well, except for the drummer. See, for the rest of us, I've been as close to them as I am to you right now.
Yeah.
We've been in the Zoom room together.
Yeah.
Where does everybody live these days?
Well, I live in Florida, so
Yeah.
BP, our drummer, he lives in North Carolina. So he did actually drive down to my house to record the drums, which was a lot of fun. Because after not meeting for all those years, we didn't know how it was going to be. And then it was almost immediately, we just clicked and took up where we'd left off.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting in front of the recordings, listening to things, talking about things, brainstorming. It was exactly like in the studio all those years ago. And we've kind of maintained that. Gary, the guitarist, he lives in London, so he was recording his stuff, sending it over. Mick, bass player, lives in Ireland, and so he was sending stuff over. And that's how it happened.
Does it feel strange to collaborate this way, through, using modern technology instead of all being in the same room together?
I think it's better, really, because you can take your time. Back in the day, studio time was so darn expensive. If you go into the studio, you just got to get it done. The stress is so bad. And so a lot of times you don't get the best performance.
Mhm.
See, I can remember pretty much with every album I ever did, there'd be at least one song I could never get right in the studio. I always sang it live just fine. And in the studio, there's some kind of nerves or something that takes over, or the pressure of it. And I think it's probably the same for the other musicians, because BP on the drums, for instance, back when we used to tour, everybody who'd ever seen the band live would have said he was a really powerful drummer, but we never really captured that too much in the old albums, partly probably because of the style of music it was back then, being some kind of robotic and electronic. And so now finally he just was able to spread out and do what he wanted to do, and it was a real lot of fun, because during the conversation of making this album, he said his inspiration to play was John Bonham. Now, we never knew that because we never really talked about that. And then Gary, the guitarist, he said his inspiration was Jimi Hendrix. So that's why you get to hear some of this more kind of heavy rock type elements through this new album that were never there before. Actually, my first concert in my life was Zeppelin. As a child from school, went to the Royal Albert Hall to see them. And so that's certainly something we would never really have explored back in the day.
Yeah, now you have to do a hard rock album and just call it Classix Rock.
Well, how about Classix Rocks? I like that better.
I just want to say this is great. You're getting to reconnect as adults, if you will,
Yeah,
after all this
true.
time too, as people.
Yeah,
It's wonderful. Yeah.
that is very true, actually, Ronnie. That's a good observation because we are so much more mature, and I've written about this somewhat in the songs on the album. Like there's a song called Final Symphony,
Mhm.
and one of the lines that stuck in my head is where I said, "Drop of water, you are not the sea." Because back in the day, I thought yeah. In fact, I think the next line goes on to something, the world doesn't revolve around me, something of that nature. And so when I was 20 something years old, I thought the world did revolve around me.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it is great to work together with maturity where we don't have clashing egos anymore or anything of that nature. We're just doing this. We don't have to do it. Our lives don't depend on it. And so it's a lot of fun. And everybody's been given the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do because I produced it. So to a large degree, they've given me the final word on things. They're not always. Sometimes we've had a bit of a argument about a certain thing that one of them wants to be in there, another one doesn't want to be in there.
Right.
And so sometimes I'm the referee, but I've enjoyed it a lot because, as Steve, you said, I've done a lot of my own albums over the years.
Mhm.
So I don't get to talk to anybody about them. I just do what I want to do. And so the tension of being in a band where you've got inspiration, ideas coming from all over the place, and you've got to make them work together and figure out the best final version.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
it's really great. And also it's all stuff I would never have done any of these songs on my own. If I was doing an album on my own right now, it wouldn't have sounded anything like this, and I wouldn't have done any of these songs.
This isn't a situation where you said, "Hey, I've got these ideas, take them and run with them," or are all these songs built on, maybe Gary submitted the main idea for this song or the main structure for this song, or maybe Mick, submitted an idea. Is that how you worked on this record?
Well, usually it starts with me because I've always written the lyrics because I
Mhm.
just feel better singing words that express what I think,
Right.
more honest in a way.
Right.
And so then I'd probably make some kind of a demo as time went on and we were doing more songs. The demos probably became more sparse and basic just to get them out there.
Yeah.
And so then they start with their input. And so sometimes the character of a song radically changes. Sometimes there are new parts added. Sometimes new ideas. So they were all putting in new stuff. Sometimes a certain line, like a bass line, isn't what I expected, and it's totally different to what would have been on my demo. Or they'll come up with an idea, mix it up. We should have tablas on this, or we should have a backward piano. BP, although he's the drummer, is very much an ideas man. So he'd be calling me saying, "Oh, we have to have an orchestra on this," and I'm thinking, "Oh no, that's going to take days to get that together."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a positive in a way, because back in the day, it would have just been we can't afford it. Whereas now it doesn't cost anything to do it, but it does take an awful lot of time
Yeah.
and effort to get it to do it. Gary would sometimes send guitar parts that he didn't, I didn't expect. And one in particular is on our new single, No Do-Overs. The first half is just an acoustic guitar.
Yep.
We never ever did anything like that before in Classix.
Yeah.
But when I heard it, it was like, oh, okay, this is not at all what I expected, but this really brings a really interesting character to the song, which it did. It's that song started off more like an electronic-y type of thing.
Yeah.
And so after a while, all the electronics are gone. You got guitar and orchestra. And so that's kind of the way that the songs change. Sometimes they got longer and longer. At the end of the album, we've got Color Me the Sky,
Yes.
which started off like I guess you just say a regular sort of 3-minute pop rock song. And then when the guitars came in, so I didn't know that in the intervening years since we last worked together, Gary had been on courses on classical guitar and funk guitar, and he's a teacher now, guitar and bass and drums. And so first of all, we got this nylon string kind of classical picking guitar, and thought, oh, that's really interesting. That's something we would never have tried.
Yeah.
And then as the song progresses, all of a sudden there's these raunchy chords and riff type of thing that reminded me a bit of ELO or Bachman Turner Overdrive. And I said, that's too good to waste.
Yeah.
When you think the song's over, then let's go somewhere else with it.
Yeah.
And so it kind of comes as a surprise halfway down the song. And so next thing BP's saying to me, and that needs an orchestra, that song. So, oh no. So I do the orchestra. Then he says, and I think you need to add a choir. I was like, no, my goodness. And so by the time all the kitchen sink and everything was in, I said, this has got to be the end of the album because we're never going to be able to follow this.
Yeah, exactly. The tracks flow together as if they're connected physically and spiritually. Now, is there a lyrical theme to the album? And I mean, if not a concept, at least something that ties it all together?
Well, I think, first of all, there's more musically a concept that ties it all together. Because what we talked about was back in the day when we were all kids, you remember when you get a new album by somebody you really like, it was an event, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like I remember at school and our little tribe or our pack of boys that loved rock music. And so if there was a really good new album, you might even bunk off school that day and go to one of the houses to listen through. And you were proud to carry it under your arm, right, with a great artwork that represented your style. And so, of course, streaming and downloading destroyed all of that.
Yeah.
But this album is coming out on vinyl as well as the other means. So once we knew we were going to have a vinyl record, it was like, okay, this is let's go back to the heyday of music when music was really good, music really mattered. It was important because if nothing else, it's going to be important to our fans. And so we wanted the whole album to run together as one piece. Obviously, on vinyl, you got to change over the side, but if you got the CD or something, you can actually listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. Most of the tracks run into one another, and there are interesting transitions and things. But in themes, I think there's 2 or 3 maybe variations on a theme, because above all else, we know who our audience is now, and that when you're young and you're starting off and you're trying to be more successful, if somebody says, who's your music for? Most times you'd probably say, oh, everybody. Because you vainly think everybody is going to listen to music, and they don't. And also over the years, when I produce young artists and all of that, they'll usually say that because they don't know. Like, who's your music for? Oh, it's for everybody. That means it's for nobody. But now we're very clear. Our audience is mature people like you and I, who've lived a lot of life, who loved music when they were old, and obviously still love music now. But in the meantime, they've grown up. A lot of them have got married and had kids, and or have a view of life, a mature view of life, and are interested in things, not just our little circle. And so really, I've been very clearly speaking to them. And so, what are our observations of life looking back? And so sometimes it's looking back and kind of learning from our mistakes a little bit. Sometimes it's reflecting on the fact we still make mistakes just the same now when we're old. So maybe we haven't learned anything, or maybe it's just the human condition that we still keep trying to perfect ourselves and grow up. I mean, I used to think I was really smart, but these days in Florida, up until quite recently, actually, I thought I was pretty smart. And lately, here in Florida, I've got a number of friends who are in their 20s, and they're really smart. And I thought, I'm not as smart as I thought I was. And so there's that. And also a kind of reflection on where we are and where we might go, in the sense that we're not dead yet. I almost called one of the songs, "You're not dead. We're not dead yet." Well, because it really seems, doesn't it, like being 60 or 50 is not really old like we used to think it was. When you got Jagger still out there in his 80s, running around the stage and doing whatever he's doing, and all these other bands who are a good generation older than us and are still doing their thing, and not even just bands, really. Obviously, people we all know who are 60, 70 years old are jumping on planes and going to other countries and
Yeah.
things to, places to go, things to see, things to do. And so that's kind of what I'm reflecting on in this album quite a bit. But also there's because we are more mature in our taste and everything, hopefully a bit more cultured, some of the lyrics are intended to just be kind of poetic and dreamy.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, like when we were very, very young, and we might hear the Beatles generation saying how much they love Bob Dylan and his lyrics. But I don't think Bob Dylan would ever explain his lyrics or talk about them. He just writes it and that's it. It's up to
Right.
you. You can run with it, interpret it. And so that's why we've got things on there like Color Me the Sky. I could not tell you what it means. If I look at the lyrics there, I know I wrote them and I must have been thinking of something at the time I wrote them, but I couldn't really tell you anything about it other than it sounds kind of dreamy and maybe a bit prophetic or something futuristic.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you somewhere, and then you can decide for yourself how you interpret it, how you apply it to your life, if at all.
From the electronic stomp of the title track, or the electronic glam stomp, I really like to call it, to these songs that I feel that contain a lot of beauty, like No Do-Overs, Wretched. This album's musical landscape is really a sonic emotional roller coaster. But then you've got the re-recording of Inside Outside, which is wonderful, and you've added the prelude to it. But then you revisit one of my favorite Classix Nouveaux songs, and that's Never Never Comes.
Well, it turns out that Never Never Comes is not only your favorite Classix Nouveaux song, it's the world's favorite.
Oh, is it?
We've always known it was huge in Poland, like any Polish person who was alive at that time you speak to, they'll say, oh, Classix Nouveaux Never Never Comes. And they would almost get emotional talking about it and the effect it has on them. But recently, I noticed on Spotify that Never Never Comes has something like 1.7 million streams, and that's way ahead of all of our other songs. And so people normally assume in the UK that Is It a Dream was a hit, so that'd be the biggest, or people over here may be Guilty.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's Never Never Comes is way, way ahead there. And so there's just something about that song that has stood the test of time. Even young people, some of those 20-year-olds I mentioned, they've discovered it on Spotify and they come up to me singing Never Never Comes. My nephew in England, who was not born when that was out, he sends me a message of him singing Never Never Comes. And
Wow.
so I thought, isn't this interesting? Out of all of a repertoire, this is what they pick up on. And when we started exploring it, out of all the older songs that we tried, that was one that we thought it somehow got new life in it yet. And so it was worth including. The members of the band almost fell in love with it all over again. BP says every day he goes down to his basement and plays that song because it makes him happy.
Yeah.
And also with that particular song being from our third album, what I said to you about the poetic is something I really started at that time, because I cannot tell you what Never Never Comes means or anything else in the lyrics there, but they just sound great. They sound beautiful. And so I'm happy with that. Everybody can interpret it the way they want.
When you go into the record the album, did you specifically say we're going to record these 9 songs, or are there songs that are left over that you just felt couldn't fit into the flow of the album?
Yeah, there were 3 or 4 songs that didn't really go anywhere, partly because, as I mentioned, we had not totally established what our new style was going to be, what it was going to sound like.
Yeah.
So at the outset, I was just kind of throwing out things that I had written and experimented with. Sometimes there was one song I would have really liked to have finished, but I just couldn't come up with the right lyrical idea for it. It had the musical thing, and I'd be waiting for the inspiration. It just didn't come at that time. So, those are the ones that got finished.
Fix your eyes upon the prize. Fix your eyes.
you started planning the album, did you have an idea of how you wanted the album to sound, and how close is the finished product to that original idea?
I think it's way better than we expected it to sound, really. Probably in our heads, we had certain aspirations. Like I mentioned to you with the drums, like we really wanted the drums to sound really heavy. And it's great that we can achieve that now where we couldn't back in the day. We just didn't have the knowledge. So the technology wasn't there really. Because when you had to record everything in an expensive studio, I remember hearing that Queen for Bohemian Rhapsody, they had to have about 10 days, not just Bohemian Rhapsody, but that whole album, like about 10 days just working on the drums before anything else would go on. And even then, if you listen by today's standards, they sound like matchboxes. And so that was a good solid base for a lot of the songs. I think the fact that early on we started to see that the guitars were going to be a lot more prominent because he was given the freedom to play whatever he wanted. As many, like oftentimes he'd do 5 or 6 tracks of guitars for a song. And I think back in the day we didn't give him that freedom, but also we were probably more aware of that was the era of the synthy sort of robotic type bands. And so we had more parameters than today. We didn't have any at all. It's like, okay, well, nobody remembers us, and nobody is, aside from a few fans, nobody is really yelling out for us to do something new. So we can just do whatever we want. And then we'll see what it ends up. I guess the other thing would be that personally, obviously, my singing has changed over the years anyway, and plus the kind of things that I used to do back in the day, a lot of growling and screaming, they were partly because I kind of like the bizarre. As I've been doing these interviews, I've realized that early things that really caught my attention would be like Virginia Plain, This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lena Lovitch. Do you know her?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
My Lucky Numbers Up. I remember going to yeah, of course she is an American, but she made it in England, and I guess she went to live in England, so opposite to me. So as a young person, I'm at a gig of hers in the college, standing like right in the front and thinking, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be. And so rather than wanting to be like the Bay City Rollers and Teen Idol type characters, I want to be the bizarre one. I want to do something that people are not really doing. And so I think I might have gone a bit too far. So I think the fans who are the diehard fans and have stayed such all these years, they love the growling and the screaming. But everyone else who thought Classix Nouveaux was awful probably thought that because of the growling and screaming. So now that I don't do that anymore, they can sit down and enjoy it.
But see, that's why I think that I like the third album the most, because that's sort of a more refined vocal, as opposed to a lot of the growling and screaming. Although that's such a big part of the charm too of the first 2 albums.
Well, I can see when we're very young the charm, because I guess due to all the revisiting right now, both us and the fans, one of the songs that I've kind of written off all these years by Classix is Nasty Little Green Men. And I never understood why people like that until one of the various cover versions or remixes that's out there was by a band. I have no idea who they are, where they're from. They're called Kraken Not Stirred, I think is the name. And so it's like a electronic-y version of Nasty Little Green Men. And I listened to it and I thought, this is really good. I like this. and so it got me to appreciate the song again. And so I can see if there was a young person, like I was looking up to Lena Lovitch and Sparks, if there was a young person, a teenager back then who was looking at Classix, I could see how they might well have enjoyed that or been inspired by all the zaniness of it. But eventually it's probably a good idea to grow up, I think.
Does the band have any plans beyond Battlecry, or is it a never say never never comes type of situation?
Well, yes and no. We are talking about doing some remixes and maybe some EPs. Beyond that, no idea. We never expected to be in this place we are today, and so you'd have to say no, never say never, because we're always open to surprises.
Yeah.
And particularly as the album is not even out yet. Like once it's actually out, who knows? You know, who knows what's going to happen? I keep saying to people, look, old fogies like us don't get into the charts anymore, you know, and so don't put your expectations too high. But stranger things have happened, I guess.
Are they going to push it on that Heritage chart? Wasn't it Mike Reed, I think, has a Heritage chart?
Oh yeah. Mike Reed already has the new singles. So,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
And in fact, the video for No Do Overs, Mike Reed is in it.
Oh, awesome.
A couple of times. And so that will go live on the day of the album release, November the 17th. And we've got what do they call it? A listening party, I suppose, is what they call it, right?
Yeah.
A couple of days early on the 14th. And so I'm thinking about maybe we might give people a preview of the video who are in the listening
awesome.
party on that day.
Awesome.
So they can start to be excited about it.
Anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
Well, we're going to have Battlecry out in the new year, early in the new year.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a video as well. There's an 8-minute extended mix now of that. And then a little bit later, next year, before the summer, we have ideas to do something else, maybe with these remixes and so on we're talking about.
Fantastic.
So we certainly will. We're not sort of disappearing back into the woodwork immediately.
Right.
So yeah, we're going to keep working for a few months at least to come, and then the rest is up to the public. You know, if the public determines that we should do something else, then maybe we will.
If we count, we want something else. We want more.
California. I always love to come to California. You know, or with Classix, we never made it out to California. Like I think.
Oh wow.
I think the furthest we ever went west, which is not west at all, obviously, was Chicago.
Wow.
So we only ventured out into the Midwest, and that was it. So I was always excited to see California, and so it took it until I came to live here, until I actually made it out to California. And it's one of those places in the country. There's 2 or 3 places in the country where I would always kind of want to spend extra time if I ever had to visit there. So California was one, New Orleans is one, and Florida used to be, but now I'm here all the time. So
yeah. Now
it's cheaper than California, you know.
It's very surprising that you didn't ever play Los Angeles, the band, like, you know, the one-off gig at the Roxy or whatever, you know.
Right, that's what they used to do, isn't it? I think X-Ray Specs did. So BP, our drummer, you know, he was there doing that.
Yeah.
But it might have been to do with the fact that, as I mentioned, at that particular period, right at the beginning of the 80s, the reputation of English bands had been tarnished somewhat.
Yeah.
By those who shall know, who we shall not name anymore.
Anyway, that's it. I'd like to thank our special guest, SAL Solo, for appearing on this episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Remember to check out the brand new Classix Nouveaux album, Battlecry, available November 17th. It is, in my opinion, their most consistent, and it is a wonderful album. It is a great album filled with great music and emotion. Thank you, Sal, for appearing on the show, and we will see everybody next time on Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Goodbye, everybody.
Fix your eyes on me.